Has Uniqlo U lost its soul? That's not a new question. People have complained for half a decade about how it's the same boring few pieces, quality is dropping, etc. But then a new collection drops, you try the pieces on and it clicks. Not every piece is perfect, but there still are bangers and that's the way it's always been. That was my standard answer to such complaints. The reports of Uniqlo U's deaths are greatly exaggerated. Or is it? In the last few seasons, the volume of gripes are creeping up. Quality has gone downhill, the designs are getting repetitive, blah blah blah. These complaints have not changed, and neither has the amount of plastic in the collections, which has always been there. But as someone who has followed Uniqlo U for its entire journey, I find myself becoming increasingly unable to refute those claims. In fact, I find myself no longer buying something every season. And being someone who's done a lot of research and talking about Lemaire, the designer behind Uniqlo U, I'll go ahead and admit it right now. Something fundamental has changed within Uniqlo U. I bet you're feeling it too, and I now have the words to explain what you're feeling. First of all, isn't it incredibly strange to even claim that a mass clothing retailer can have soul in the first place? The last place you'd be looking for soul is in a strip mall. Uniqlo U was the only exception. For many of my viewers, myself included, Uniqlo U was our gateway drug into serious fashion, not the fast fashion clothing-shaped objects you'll find in a suburban strip mall, but capital F fashion was the designer and vision behind it. For many of us, it was our fashion education. From the very start, it was different. In the beginning, it was not Uniqlo U, but Uniqlo and Lemaire in fall 2015. A collab featuring Christophe Lemaire, a designer who had just left the throne of Hermès, the pinnacle of luxury fashion, for Uniqlo, a pedestrian clothing retailer. That first collection flew off the shelves, featuring cashmere wool coats and cashmere sweaters, everything under $200. Tadashi Yanai, founder of Uniqlo, immediately offered to extend the collab. He had an ambitious goal. You see, prior to this, Uniqlo was widely known as a place you went to if you just needed something to cover your body, not for fashion. In fact, it was kind of taboo for fashionistas to be decked out in Uniqlo. Imagine being decked out in Kirkland's signature. Christophe Lemaire had a different idea. Customers don't care about another collab, they just want to find the right product. Whatever he proposed, Yanai-san must have been impressed because he put all his chips on Lemaire. Uniqlo would spin up a whole new department and a whole new R&D center headed by Christophe. Its end product? Uniqlo U. A permanent line within Uniqlo, not separate but complementary to mainline Uniqlo. Its initial logo was 12 U's, reflected that democratic vision. It also reflected the fact that the collection was produced by a team of 15 from the very start. Christophe says, "It took 6 months to recruit the right people who understood it was industrial design, not fake luxury or fake fashion." That right product was a balance of design, quality, and price. First of all, quality. Christophe had trust that Yanai-san would not compromise on quality. Everyone knows by now Uniqlo has the best quality among mall brands. Second, design. Lemaire has always had a particular way with design, from the workwear military references to the muted palette. I've made several videos on this topic, and if there's one thing you learn, it's that Lemaire is not a brand jumping first on every fad and trend. Instead, Christophe tries to fill the gap between what's fashion and what's normal. A Yoji-like philosophy of timeless clothing that ages beautifully. And finally, price. Uniqlo cannot sell garments at designer prices. In 2016, Christophe said, "So we know from the beginning it has to be more cotton than expensive wools. But, to be honest, I've been quite surprised that I haven't had to make such compromises." For example, the ubiquitous Uniqlo U crewneck tee, first introduced in 2017, still in the collection and hasn't changed much at all. In fact, you probably have one in your closet. Feel free to pull it out and follow along. The first thing you'll notice is this heavyweight fabric. I'm sure when you bought it, you noticed how rough and stiff it felt. It's actually not very high quality in the European luxury sense. It's more like heavy-duty, blue-collar American stuff from the 60s. I've owned mine for the greater part of a decade, and it's held up incredibly well. The fabric is faded in a way that gives depth to the color. Speaking of color, The collar hasn't turned into bacon because of the way it's constructed, where the neck ribbing sandwiches the body fabric and is held together by 2 lines of stitching. Collars that tend to bacon are held together only by 1 line of stitching. By the way, you'll find this exact same detail on t-shirts made by 𝗖𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 and 𝗵𝗵𝗽𝗀𝗃 𝗵𝗃, costing many times more. Another example of Uniqlo U's balance of design, quality, and price is my cotton cashmere shirt cardigan from Spring-Summer 2019. It's made from a 95% cotton, 5% cashmere jersey knit. The token cashmere content is only there to give it a fuzzier feel, but it's still a respectable fabric. The construction is solid, the linking is well done, and it's a competent garment that's lasted a half-decade. There's also a funny story behind this piece. At the time when I bought it, I wasn't into designer fashion or anything. My idea of fashion mostly was emulating influencers that I liked. I remember being drawn to Uniqlo U because of all the hype on fashion forums. It had a name of a big designer behind it, so it had to be good, right? And at the time, many influencers I followed were wearing chunky cardigans as a micro-trend. I remember walking into a Uniqlo store, checking out the Uniqlo U collection, and being frustrated. Everyone was wearing chunky cardigans, why couldn't Uniqlo make one? So I walked out with the closest thing, this guy here. Later on, I checked social media, and most of those influencers were just absolutely dunking on this piece, saying it looked like something their grandpa would wear. I definitely had buyer's regret. As an older person with more fashion knowledge and styling experience, I'm actually kinda glad Christophe stands his own ground. If you look at Lemaire's collections, they're very selective of which trends to adopt. Even then, it'll be a piece that rhymes with the trend, not the trendy piece itself. Like my cardigan. I still wear it, but if it was that chunky cardigan, I would have tossed this much earlier. Nobody wants to wear something that's recognizably 2019. Christophe says, I'm against clothing as a disguise, the social shell, trends. All that is a bit outdated in my opinion. Fundamentally, what matters to me is having that relationship of trust with clothes. Believe me, this took me years to understand, but when I did, it was a tremendous gift to my own style literacy. So we could understand that when I first saw the Uniqlo U Fall 2023 collection, something just felt incredibly off. It felt like something was stuck in my throat, something I couldn't swallow. You know what it is? It's these cargo pants. Cargo pants have been incredibly popular for a while now. What's wrong, you might ask? I've tried the parachute cargos on in person and I think they're good. However, in Lemaire mainline, they have never put out a pair of cargo pants during the whole cargo craze of the last few years. You'll get tool pockets, cargo pockets on one side for shorts, details that rhyme with the trend, but never the trend itself. It's a very intentional choice, and frankly why we love Lemaire. Then bam! Cargo pants out of the blue. You can see why it would feel out of tune with the rest of Lemaire's design. And the parachute cargo story gets even stranger. They came out in 23 AW, then for one season, they were moved from Uniqlo U to Uniqlo C. In the press preview for Uniqlo U, it was there, but when the collection hit stores, it's somehow now in C. And then one season later, it's moved back to U. At this point, I have to question, who shoved this into the collection? Whose vision is this? And there's more. I feel like Uniqlo U has acquired this gorpcore tone over the last few seasons, with the running vests, the running packs, the waterproof membrane jackets, the fishing shirts, and of course, the parachute cargos. It's starting to feel trendy. While it's true that you'll find gorp adjacent items in mainline Lemaire, but over there, it's always tangential, interpreted through vintage outdoor gear and military. What you won't find is technical waterproof membrane fabrics, technical waterproof zips, even for nylon jackets. And guess what? Waterproof zips were everywhere in Uniqlo U Fall-Winter 2025. Seriously, when I first saw this collection, my first reaction was, it was pretty good. My second reaction was, who designed this? Speaking of the Fall-Winter 25 collection, I distinctly remember visiting the store in person on release day. There was a 100% wool sweater that looked interesting, but when I touched it, I just started laughing in store. It had the exact same hand feel as an army issue glove liner. Rough, thin, and zero stretch. Definitely not the pinnacle of quality. I distinctly remember thinking that I'd rather buy the poly blend knits in the same collection because somehow those had better quality. Or the question is, at that point, why buy anything? Especially if you already own pieces from previous collections. Back when the showpiece knitwear had premium lamb's wool or extra fine merino in the name, of course they were thin and loosely knit, but it was still very respectable given the price. Make no mistake, Uniqlo U has always had a lot of plastic, especially in the outerwear, but you would always find incredibly high quality pieces that punched way above its price in other lower price categories. The shirting was one such place. It used to be made from extra long staple cotton, and now it's mostly polyester nylon blends. They say that quantity has a quality of its own, and the quantity broke a new low record in 2025 spring-summer for men's, where a grand total of 2 pieces of outerwear were offered. And I have the data to put this into context. I crunched the numbers for the count of men's outerwear offered over the years. It started off in 2016 with 10 pieces, went up and down over the years until a golden age during 2020 was a whole 13 pieces. Until 2022 fall-winter, it never dipped below 6. From that point onwards, the outerwear count has never reached 6. It's now clear that something massive has changed, and it changed between 2022 and 2023. Same time when the parachute cargos were introduced. I don't think this is a coincidence. And to be honest with you, I've always had a feeling this was bound to happen. Those of us who bought Uniqlo U during its golden era of 2019 to 2022 probably have one thing in common. We all bought it on sale. Most of the collection would end up on a sale rack, then sent back online where the discounts would have us all sweeping in like vultures week after week. And that's never good news for a retailer. Pro tip, if your favorite fashion boutique is offering year-round sales, you should be very worried about their future. Essence's sales were legendary. Last year, they filed for bankruptcy. So eventually the party had to end. A business exists to make profits, after all. In fashion, there exists someone whose entire job is figuring out how to make profits. They're called merchandisers. Their job is to decide what to make, how much to make, and at what price. And often, they hold an adversarial role to the designers, who bring them all sorts of artsy-fartsy designs, which they shoot down with a universal, "This won't sell." And in my review of Uniqlo U 26 Spring-Summer, I wrote that this collection felt designed more by merchandisers than designers. The continuing material downgrades, the slimmed-down collection, and the focus on trendy archetypes are all the hallmarks of merchandising's ruthless drive on profitability. Under this lens, the Gorp core shift makes complete sense. The Uniqlo U design team is incredibly talented. This is their way of making lemonade out of lemons. How do you use plastic and not create closing-shaped objects? You use plastic where it's useful. And guess where that is? Gorp core. Christophe says, Uniqlo is a huge brand with a certain way of working, which I didn't really understand in the beginning. The way merchandisers conceive design is different from my background. Well, how do merchandisers at Uniqlo conceive of design? Let's turn towards another character closely involved with Uniqlo, Naoki Takizawa, previous design director at Uniqlo, and before that, he was creative director at 𝗖𝗵𝗍𝗃𝗍, succeeding Issei himself. In his book, he describes working as a consultant for a major apparel retailer and proposing a business code, only to be mercilessly shot down by the merchandisers because his code was not 86 centimeters long. Because that's what the merchandisers' data said. Data in these big trend reports that everyone reads, where they have precisely quantified every little thing that sells well. He wondered, how can you express a brand's personality, a designer's vision, designing from numbers like this? It might sound like I'm being very harsh on merchandising, but they're an essential part of fashion. All I'm saying is for Uniqlo U, the balance between merchandising and design shifted in 2023. And I have the proofs to back it up. In Uniqlo's 2023 press release announcing Clear Weight Color as creative director, this is what the big shots had to say. She is one of the few creators in the world able to achieve a high level of balance between creation and merchandising. To me, that reads as an implicit comparison to Christophe, Sarah Lynn, and Jill Sander, whose artistic visions, as great as they were, ended up one too many times on the sale rack. Yanai-san has succeeded in making Uniqlo cooler than Kirkland Signature, so why keep bleeding money? This is why the outerwear count dropped off a cliff in 2023. This is why the shirts in extra long staple cotton disappeared in 2023. This is why the parachute cargos got shoehorned in 2023. From here on, the merchants run the show. In some way, I wonder if this was all inevitable. In some twisted sense, Lemaire's vision of elevated basics is really not as democratic as it seems. Most Lemaire heads are not fashion beginners. On average, we're really into fashion. It's just that we have done an entire lap around trends, hype, and have now come back to clothes we can wear day in and day out. In fact, Christophe thinks so too. Dressing well isn't superficial at all. Fundamentally, it says a lot about us, and it requires knowing yourself well, which takes time. I think elegant people are those who have done that work. Your average person who's into style but not fashion isn't really buying Uniqlo U. They're buying Lululemon. It's no coincidence that's where Uniqlo U and C are going. T-shirts, hoodies, and sweatpants, the biggest categories in the collections now. On top of that, our world has changed. Large-scale global wars is driving up material costs, and borrowing money is no longer free. Today, compared to Zara and H&M's more premium offerings, Uniqlo U is now both cheaper and more plasticky. I don't think this will work out for Uniqlo in the long run. I have ideas on how it could work, but Uniqlo will need to pay me consulting fees. So what about us consumers? While Uniqlo U will no doubt still have good pieces, I can no longer blindly recommend it to people new to fashion. You have to know what you're doing to pick out the stuff worth keeping. But to me, what I lament the most is I no longer believe one can get a fashion education from Uniqlo U. You need unexpected pieces like the shirt cardigan to show you what's possible in fashion. Things you already expect, crop jackets, cargos, sweatpants, they cannot do that. The good news is, the Uniqlo U golden era of 2019 to 2022 is very recent, and there's still tons of it floating around on secondhand. I went down a memory hole during the research of these videos. I was finding all these incredible pieces that still feel fresh even today. I'm working on an article about the best pieces from this golden era. If you're interested, stay tuned on my Blue Sky and Substack. And remember Naoki Takizawa? He quit his post as director of special projects at Uniqlo in 2023, the same year when everything changed. Since then, he's been leading Muji Labo. The stuff there is a lot more expensive, but you absolutely get what you pay for and maybe a bit more, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it. It has that golden era Uniqlo U magic, like with the loop wheel sweatshirts and the cashmere coats. In the meantime, I think I'll wear my shirt cardigan once the weather gets warmer. I think its tighter fit is becoming on trend. What once was grandpa's clothes is now cool, since we're all digging up vintage from other people's grandpas. Trends come and go, but clothing with its own point of view will never be out of fashion. That's it, thank you for watching, 𝗵𝗽𝗻 out.